July 9th, 1943, 02:45 hours, Bark South Beach on the Piceno Peninsula at the southeastern tip of Sicily. The leading assault craft of the 51st Highland Division are running in toward the surf. The 7th Battalion of the Argyll and Sutherland Highlanders is in the first wave. Italian coastal defenders are watching the approach from concrete pillboxes set behind the dunes. The infantry inside those landing craft expect the standard pattern of Allied amphibious assault. Naval gunfire stops 15 minutes before touchdown. The bombarding cruisers shift their fire inland to protect the assault wave from short rounds. The defenders climb out of their shelters, man their machine guns and wait for soft targets to wade ashore. That is what the Italians on Bark South are expecting. That is not what comes. Half a mile from the surf line, a roar rises from astern of the assault craft. A sheet of flame leaps high into the air behind the Highlanders. The horizon turns orange. 2,500 high-explosive rockets are in the air at once. Each carries a 60-pound warhead. They cover the next 90 seconds in a continuous moving curtain of fire that walks ashore from the waterline to the dunes behind the beach. The Argylls land. Italian resistance is broken before they reach dry sand. The official report records less than a dozen casualties for the entire opening assault. The weapon that did this was a rocket. The Royal Navy had spent the previous 3 years insisting that rockets did not belong on a warship. The men who built it were called Wheezers and Dodgers by the Admiralty's professional gunnery establishment. Its parent program had nearly destroyed the battlecruiser HMS Hood by accident in 1941. How did a weapon born from one of the Royal Navy's most embarrassing failures become the weapon that walked British infantry ashore on every major Allied landing of the European War? The problem the Royal Navy faced in 1942 was straightforward. Amphibious assault doctrine was being rewritten in real time. Dieppe, in August of that year, had shown what happened when assault troops landed against intact beach defences. 6,000 Canadians, British Commandos and Royal Marines went in. Just over half came back. The rest were killed, wounded or taken prisoner in a single morning. The Allied planners reached one obvious conclusion. The defenders had to be suppressed at the moment of landing, not before it. Naval gunfire could shell the coast for hours, but the bombardment had to lift 15 minutes before touchdown to protect the assault wave. That 15-minute gap was when the Germans climbed out of their dugouts, manned their machine guns, and waited. Conventional artillery could not solve the problem. Not enough barrels at sea, not enough volume of fire. What was needed was a weapon that could deliver thousands of shells onto a strip of beach in the last 60 seconds, before troops touched down, and then stop the moment they reached the surf line. The Royal Navy did not have such a weapon. Worse, it had spent the previous 3 years convincing itself that rockets, which might in theory deliver such a barrage, were a dead end. The reason was the Unrotated Projectile, an anti-aircraft rocket pushed into service in 1940 by Winston Churchill on the urging of Frederick Lindemann. The UP was unreliable. It frequently failed to fire. When it did fire, the wind sometimes blew it back into the rigging of the ship that had launched it. After HMS Hood was lost in May 1941, the Admiralty Board of Inquiry ordered all UP equipment removed from the rest of the home fleet anyway. To the gunnery establishment, Naval Rockets were finished. The Combined Operations Headquarters under Vice-Admiral Lord Louis Mountbatten saw the problem differently. Inside COHQ, a small directorate built around Sir Charles Goodeve and Lieutenant Commander Neville Shute Norway, officially the Directorate of Miscellaneous Weapons Development, unofficially the Wheezers and Dodgers, was looking at the same beach suppression problem. Their answer was to take the discredited rocket technology, scale it up, and put 1,000 of them onto a single ship. The conversion was as crude as it was effective. Combined Operations took redundant landing craft tank Mark II and Mark III hulls, welded the bow ramp shut to give the deck a continuous armoured face, built a new strength deck over the tank well, and covered that deck end to end with rocket projectors. Each projector fired a single 3-inch rocket carrying a 60-pound high explosive warhead. The same warhead the Royal Air Force fitted to the rocket projectiles its Typhoons used to destroy German tanks in Normandy. A Mark III-based LCT rocket carried 1,066 of these projectors, arranged in long parallel banks running fore and aft. The crew of 17 worked under a converted bridge superstructure. Below decks, the former tank deck was repartitioned for accommodation, magazine space and reload stores. The vessel measured 192 feet in length and 31 feet in beam. Loaded displacement was approximately 600 long tons. 2 Paxman diesel engines produced around 460 horsepower each, driving the ship to a maximum speed of 9 knots. Draft was less than 4 feet forward, which allowed the ship to close the beach to within 3,500 yards before firing. The rocket projectors themselves had no traverse and no elevation. They were welded at a fixed angle of 45 degrees pointing straight ahead. The aiming system was the ship itself. To fire on a target, the captain steered onto the correct heading, watched the Type 970 surface search radar at the stern, and pressed the firing key when the radar showed the precise range required for that day's wind and air pressure. The entire bombardment was governed by ship's heading and ship's range. A full salvo took 90 seconds. The 1,066 rockets were not fired in a single burst. They were released in 24 subsalvos of 39 to 42 rockets each, with a fraction of a second between bursts. The reason was structural. A simultaneous launch of more than 1,000 rockets would have broken the back of the lightly built LCT hull. The staggered firing also produced the famous visual effect, a continuous rising wave of rockets that walked across the target as the ship moved slowly forward. Total explosive weight delivered per salvo was approximately 63,600 pounds, 28 tons of high explosive in 90 seconds, distributed across a strip of ground roughly 700 yards deep by 150 yards wide. The price was paid in reload time. Refilling the projectors was entirely manual. After firing her salvo, an LCT rocket needed approximately 22 hours of continuous reload work before she could fire again. Each ship was, in effect, a single-shot weapon. Combined operations built at least 36 of them. The first LCT rocket salvo in combat was fired on the night of July 9 to 10, 1943, in support of the British 8th Army's landing on Sicily. The 51st Highland Division went in at Bark South. Italian defenders of the Pacino Peninsula expected the standard preliminary bombardment, lifting 15 minutes before the assault wave touched down. They did not expect what came in the final 90 seconds before that touchdown. A Royal Navy constructor present at the operation recorded what happened. As the Highlanders' assault craft closed to within half a mile of the beach, a sheet of flame rose from astern. A multitude of crumps reached the waiting infantry. 2,500 rockets, fired in succession by the LCT rocket force, walked up the beach ahead of the troops. The Highlanders landed against broken resistance. The official report recorded less than a dozen casualties for the assault. It was the operational debut. It was also the moment that ended the Royal Navy's institutional contempt for rocket weapons. Within 24 hours, signal traffic from 8th Army headquarters was praising the new ships by name. Salerno followed in September 1943. British 10th Corps landed on the northern beaches at Roger and Uncle. The Strategic Command had decided to attempt surprise by forgoing most of the preliminary naval bombardment. Surprise was lost almost immediately. In the moments before the leading wave touched down, the LCT rockets fired the only sustained close suppression the British sector received. 10th Corps got ashore. The 16th Panzer Division counterattacked over the next 3 days, but the beachhead held. Anzio came in January 1944. 2 LCT rockets fired pre-H-hour barrages on Peter Beach in support of the British 1st Division. The landing was largely unopposed, but the rocket craft delivered the saturation fire that ensured it stayed that way during the critical first 10 minutes. By the time of Operation Neptune on June 6, 1944, the LCT rocket was a fully integrated component of Allied amphibious doctrine. 36 were assigned to the Normandy invasion. Approximately half were Royal Navy crewed and supported the British and Canadian landings on Sword, Juno and Gold beaches. The rest were transferred under reverse lend-lease to the United States Navy, with American crews for Omaha and Utah. On the British and Canadian beaches, the system worked as designed. Naval gunfire support reports record the rocket bombardment as a primary suppression element in the final 2 minutes before H-hour. German trench positions and machine gun nests behind the high water mark on Sword in particular were saturated. The 3rd British Division and attached commandos landed against light initial resistance. The official American summary report on Neptune later recorded that the LCT rockets were very effective against personnel in open ground or in trenches, and recommended that the type be retained for all future operations. Above Omaha Beach, in a German fighting position designated WN62, an 18-year-old machine gunner of the 716th Infantry Division named Franz Gockel watched the bombardment come in. He survived the day, he survived the war. In a post-war interview, he described what he had seen as a rolling wall of fire that began at the beach obstacles and walked inland. If you're enjoying this, subscribing takes a second and supports the channel. Now back to the engagement that justified the entire programme. The most concentrated single LCT rocket action came 5 months after D-Day, off the Dutch island of Walcheren. The Royal Navy's support squadron eastern flank, built around 5 LCT rockets and supporting guncraft, was committed on November 1, 1944 to Operation Infatuate II. Their task was deliberate. Captain Anthony Pugsley had decided to use his rocket and guncraft as bait, to draw the fire of the German coastal batteries at Westkapelle and let those batteries exhaust their ammunition on the support force, so that the assault LCTs carrying Royal Marine Commandos could reach the breached dike alive. It worked. The German batteries fired on the support craft for over an hour. Of the 27 craft committed, only 7 came out undamaged. 9 were sunk. 172 men were killed and 286 wounded. But the British plan was vindicated by the German response. A Royal Navy after-action report noted that the German artillerymen had made a grave tactical error. They used their ammunition on the support craft, against which they were largely ineffective at that range, instead of holding their fire for the troopships behind. The commanding officer of LCT Rocket 363, Lieutenant Rasmussen, wrote afterwards that his ship was the only one in the squadron to score direct hits on its assigned battery. 47 Commando and 48 Commando went ashore. Within 72 hours, the German guns at Walcheren had been silenced. The Scheldt estuary was opened. The supply problem that had stalled 21st Army Group since the capture of Antwerp was solved. Across Sicily, Salerno, Anzio, Normandy and Walcheren, the LCT rocket fired more than 20,000 high-explosive rockets in direct support of British, Canadian and American assault troops. The Royal Navy that had dismissed rocket weapons in 1941 ended the war owning a class of ships purpose-built around them. German doctrine had reached a different answer to the same problem. The Wehrmacht's solution was the Nebelwerfer family, a series of multi-tube ground-based rocket launchers introduced from 1941 onwards. The most common version was the 6-inch Nebelwerfer 41. 6 tubes, 6 rockets per salvo, a reload time measured in minutes rather than hours, maximum range of 7,500 yards. By every paper measurement, the Nebelwerfer beat the British rocket. It outranged the 3-inch British rocket by more than 2 to 1. A battery formation of 12 launchers could fire 72 rockets in 10 seconds. It could displace, hide and fire again. The LCT rocket could not. The LCT rocket was a slow, lightly armoured single-shot weapon that needed 22 hours to reload. But the Nebelwerfer was an artillery system. It supported a tactical battlefield. The LCT rocket was an amphibious assault weapon. It supported a single moment, the moment infantry crossed from sea to land, when defenders were watching the assault craft and not yet engaging them. A 6-rocket Nebelwerfer salvo from a single launcher delivered around 210 pounds of high explosive in 10 seconds. A single LCT rocket delivered 28 tons of high explosive in 90 seconds. That is more than 150 times the explosive weight per second. A British Tribal-class destroyer firing all 4 of her main turrets at maximum rate of fire delivered about 1,440 pounds of high explosive per minute. The LCT rocket delivered around 42,000 pounds of high explosive per minute sustained for the 90 seconds the salvo lasted, roughly 30 times the destroyer's gunnery rate. The Soviets had reached a parallel concept with the Katyusha truck-mounted rocket launcher. A 4-truck Katyusha battery delivered about 10,000 pounds of high explosive in 10 seconds. Impressive on the Eastern Front where rocket artillery operated against troops in the open, but the Katyusha rocket carried roughly a 10-pound bursting charge against the British rocket's 60-pound warhead. For breaking concrete pillboxes and reinforced sandbag positions on a defended beach, the British rocket carried 6 times the explosive per round and arrived in greater density. The Americans came late to the same conclusion. The United States Navy's LSM rocket class was a purpose-built rocket landing ship that did not enter service until 1945, 21 months after the British weapon had been operational. Its first action was at Keramaretto in March 1945, supporting the Okinawa landings. The British weapon was first, the British weapon was largest. And on every beach where Royal Navy crews fired it, it walked their infantry ashore against suppressed defences. Think back to that beach at Pacino, on the southeastern corner of Sicily, on the night of July 9, 1943. Half a mile of dark water between the 7th Argylls and an Italian coastal battery. 90 seconds of rolling fire, less than a dozen casualties for an entire assault wave. The Admiralty gunnery establishment that had dismissed naval rockets after the unrotated projectile failures of 1940 was wrong. The professional officers who called combined operations a Mountbatten playground were wrong. The intelligence assessments that placed German Nebelwerfer artillery as the decisive rocket weapon of the war were wrong. The weapon born from one of the Royal Navy's most embarrassing failures became the standard pre-landing suppression element of every major Allied amphibious operation in the European war. It went ashore at Sicily, Salerno, Anzio, Normandy, southern France and Walcheren. It was copied by the United States Navy and answered by the Soviet Army. It carried 28 tons of high explosive into 90 seconds of saturating fire. It walked British infantry through Italian, Vichy and German beach defences with casualty rates the Royal Navy had not seen since the 18th century. A German machine gunner watching from a fighting position above Omaha Beach on June 6, 1944, called what he saw a rolling wall of fire. He survived. The beach defences in front of him did not. 28 tons of high explosive, 90 seconds, one ship. The Royal Navy never built a single shot weapon like it again. It never needed to.